One thing you should keep in mind is, as I watched the television networks, I literally was watching MSNBC one night, and I saw them go from the Latino bloc to African Americans to women. And as if like this 36% of the electorate in the general election just doesn't exist. These just regular white guys, the guys sung about in Bruce Springsteen's music. As large as the Latino population is, there will be the white men voting in the next election, if you will be 5 times larger than Latino men and women combined. So it's not as if Hispanic voters don't matter. They matter very much, and they're especially key in certain swing states with high growth rates, especially among Latinos. It's just that if you are going to talk about Hispanics as a swing bloc, and you're going to talk about African Americans, and you're going to talk about women, you should probably also talk about the second largest voting bloc, which is these white guys, and especially the working and middle class white guys, which are by far the voters that the Democrats lost in recent decades, and not only in the North, but also in the South, and especially, I would emphasize, not only in the South, because it's often conceived incorrectly when this misinterpretation of polling numbers, that this was all a trend in the South. It wasn't. And that's pretty irrefutably clear when you look at the polls over the last 50 years. And for that reason, I think that these guys coming into the general election certainly have seen a Republican Party weaker on fiscal discipline. Okay? Absurd amounts of earmarks, absurdly large spending, increasing deficits, though trailing a bit recently. They've seen a Republican Party make massive mistakes on their strongest issue, which is war, national security, the war in Iraq, offering a huge opening for the Democratic Party. So in other words, they're willing to reconsider. But the question is, you don't simply end one relationship and move on to your next relationship because the last relationship was awful. You got to be attracted to the other girl, or a guy in this case, it doesn't matter. And so that these men have to feel attracted to the Democratic Party for reasons of principle and policy. And so they're going to be watching to see if, number one, if the Democratic candidate equivocates, if the Democratic candidate appears not to have any principles. Because it is clear from exit polling that these white guys, more than any other voting bloc, women, minorities, vote on character issues. And we know this from the exit polls. The character issues are sort of this belief that they believe in sort of classic principles, that they have maxims, that they're willing to commit political suicide for a stance. And then there are policies that matter to them. They're more likely to, they are more supportive of the war in Iraq. They're not happy with the war in Iraq. They, by majorities, don't believe that the war in Iraq is linked to the war on terror, actually. But they're still far less likely to want to pull out troops. They still shifted far slower than women in wanting to pull out. In the beginning of this war, about 75% of men and women in this country favored the war. Women dramatically turned much quicker than men against this war. And there's long historical reasons and gender outlook and so forth, that explains this. But these men care about national security. They do care about illegal immigration. They're, especially working class. These are the guys, some of them working construction jobs, and they've seen their jobs undercut by those who work for less wages. And as much as sometimes this veers into xenophobia, it more often does not. They're afraid of jobs being lost. They're afraid of a competing market. They're economically unstable. So the Democrats have to appear to seriously consider border enforcement on illegal immigration. They have to appear to seriously want to win in Iraq and Afghanistan. Use words like win, while accepting the reality of Iraq and possibly pulling for a pullout, if you will, but in a respect that leaves Iraq, as best as possible, and certainly doesn't dishonor the effort of those troops who went there. And I remind you that 75%, 3 in 4 of all losses in the war in Iraq are white guys, are white boys, 19, 20, 21-year-old, 3 in 4. So that also explains in part why they have stronger stances on national security overall. And certainly they also have less likely to live in cities and more likely to live in exurbs and suburbs and rural areas. So they have also a different outlook in some regards.